off your engine! Outdoor 74 says, Scotty, what's the best time to buy a new car? Well, old Scotty's so cheap, I'd never buy a new car because you can save so much money buying used ones. So if you're buying a new car, guess what? Christmas to New Year's. Nobody's buying cars then. And you could probably get the best deal that you possibly can. Now realize that car dealers, they don't own any of the cars on a lot. A bank gives them a $10 million line of credit, and then they're paying every month on the notes of the cars just like you would. So at the end of the month, especially at the end of the year, they don't want to pay for the cars that are sitting there, and they want to get rid of them. And sometimes you can get a better deal. Now, you're still not going to get a steal like you can a used car, you know? I mean, my wife's Lexus, I paid $3,000 for a car with 60,000 miles. Originally, it was close to $40,000. You're never going to get a deal like that, but you can save some money. Christmas to New Year's is generally, and then a little bit after New Year's too, people spend their money on Christmas presents. They're not buying cars. When people aren't buying cars, that's the best time you'll get a deal. Never buy a car in the spring because you won't get any deal. Edison Carlos Welch says, Scotty, it's been flooding here in the Philippines. I sprayed WD-40 on the engine bay and frame. It hasn't been in water, just being safe. Your 52 years of professional thoughts, please. Okay, it's 53 now. I had a birthday in October. Good idea. WD-40 does many things. One thing it does is it displaces water. Now, let's say you got an old-fashioned car that's got spark plugs and distributor cap. If they get wet, you can spray it with WD-40. It will displace the water, and then a lot of times you can start it back up again. Later, you can wipe it all off. But it does displace water amongst doing other things like lubrication, so that's a good idea. Up north in the United States, a lot of guys you can get these giant cans of WD-40 for spraying on the body. They'll spray it all under the body to try to keep the salt from eating the cars away, so... yeah, there's many uses. I got a bunch of videos on what to do with WD-40. Dylan Bear says, I got a 98 Honda Accord LX 2.3. I'm getting a PO401 code. I changed the EGR valve, but still have the code. Here's what often happens with Hondas is, a lot of times it's not the EGR valve itself. The EGR valve takes exhaust gas, and then when the engine thinks it needs it, it opens up the valve and it lets exhaust gas go into your intake manifold to be burned inside the engine, and that lowers the temperature of the combustion inside the engine. It might sound crazy that you're putting hot gas in to lower the temperature, but it's because it doesn't have much oxygen, so it doesn't burn. It's an inert gas. A better system would have been like to put nitrogen or something, but then you'd have to have a nitrogen tank, and exhaust gas is already on the car. It's free, and so that's why it did it that way. Take your EGR valve off, and where the inlet goes into the intake, try cleaning it. I found an old speedometer cable in a drill, put it in a drill and spin it. We'll often clear them out, because on some of the Hondas, if it's really bad, you got to take the intake manifold off and clean it physically from the inside out. Sometimes that little cable thing will work pretty good. I've done it many times. Seth Warrior says, Scotty, I have a question. Are drilled rotors better than OEM stock rotors? That depends on your definition of the word good. The reason race cars, and you see screaming race bikes on the street that people are driving around in, they have drilled rotors. Well, drilled rotors dissipate heat better. So in races, when you're going 200 miles an hour, you slam on the brakes, then you accelerate, they won't overheat and then start to slip and start to not stop correctly. A normal just stopping once fast, it doesn't matter. If you race around, the drilled rotors will perform better. They have a very downside for normal cars. One, they got all those holes drilled in. Guess what? One, they wear out faster, and two, they'll often crack. Because you got all those hole drills and they can crack instead of being solid steel. But the main thing that people who didn't know about it and put one on, and they're going to hate it, they often are noisy as can be. Because all those holes, you can hear noise, and you can feel it in the pedal a lot of times as they wear. If you're not a maniac driver, don't waste your money on that stuff. It's for racers. You don't need it on a normal car. Of course, a lot of guys put them on because, it looks like a racing car now, and it's not that expensive to buy them. They make them in China now, and they work okay, so people will do that. But you really don't need it in a normal car. Is automatic transmission fluid good for cleaning combustion chambers? It was. Back in the day, when I was a young mechanic in the 60s, early 70s, cars didn't have catalytic converters, oxygen sensors. We used to get a spray can, and we'd open the carburetors, and we'd spray automatic transmission fluid in, and it would clean out the combustion chamber. Actually did a pretty good job. But you can't do it on a modern car because that will clog up the oxygen sensor, ruin the catalytic converter over time. So you can't do that kind of stuff anymore. But it used to work really good because they didn't have catalytic converters. They had mufflers. You didn't care. It would burn it off, and the smoke would come out of the back of the tailpipe, but it didn't destroy anything like it would in a modern car. So it used to be a good way, but don't do it in a modern car. You ruin the catalytic converter and stuff. Crush on Tie says, is there a way to improve sound isolation on a car? Oh, there certainly is. I got a video, how to make an old car sound like a limousine. Watch that. There are various types of sound insulation you can buy. Some of them are sticky back, some of them just place in. And you can insulate a car sound to your heart's content. Just realize to do it correctly, it's a ginormous job. You got to take all the seats out, then insulate under them. You got to take all the doors apart, insulate inside them. It's a real job, but if done, you're going to have one quiet car. That's one of the big differences between luxury cars and cheap cars. More insulation, and cheap cars have none whatsoever. One time I took a customer for a ride. They were thinking about buying a Toyota Prius. I took them for a ride in one that I was working on. They said, I'd never buy this car. It's too noisy. Well, in their case, they didn't put insulation in because they wanted better gas mileage, and even insulation weighs something, so they wanted to make them as light as possible. So they are noisy, but they get fantastic gas mileage. But if you want to quiet down any car, you can do it to your heart's content. It's just watch a bunch of videos. Mine's just a basic one. There's guys that show absolutely everything on how to insulate a car. But realize it's time consuming. You got to take the seats out of the car. You got to do a lot of work to do it correctly. But it can be done, and it's not all that expensive. William Chan says, what do you think about an Abarth 500? A lot of people think they're modern classics because they're going to electric. Yeah, modern classic piece of junk. I had a customer when the engine blew up when he had 38,000 miles on it. They were the fancy Fiat 500s. Now, they did have an Alfa Romeo designed engine in them, so they had a better engine, and they were faster, but they were still Fiat 500 rolling piles of junk in the United States. My son went to Italy with his wife a couple of years ago, and they rented a Fiat 500, but it was a diesel. And they liked it. Fun to drive with a standard. It got fantastic gas mileage. But they never sold the diesel ones here in the United States. I've never seen one. They're horrible cars. And, they're classic pieces of junk is what it is. Don't buy one and think it's going to increase in value in the United States. I don't think that's going to happen ever. Don't waste your money on them. They're terrible vehicles. Now, I did have a customer buy one used cheap. He only paid $1,500, and he just beat the heck out of it and drove it around. It was a toy for him. But for regular transportation, or if you think it's going to go up in value, don't waste your money. Edison Carlos Welch says, Scotty, I'm curious, is always having a full tank of gas bad? I have a small tank of 35 liters. I fill it up every time I get in the middle. Thanks. Oh, no, it hurts nothing. The only thing it does, it will knock your gas mileage down a tiny amount by the weight of the gasoline that you got to pull. The worst thing to a car is actually having gas too low, because if you get low, it can suck sediment from the bottom. And if you really let it get low and drive it all the way to empty, you can ruin your fuel pump, because this may sound crazy, but it's true. Most cars have electric fuel pumps. And what lubricates the fuel pumps is the gasoline going through it. So if you actually run out of gas and that pump sucks air, the air that's being sucked in will burn the bearings of the fuel pump out. So you never want to go low. No, the only thing you do is lose a tiny amount of gas mileage because you're pulling that little bit of extra weight. But you got a small tank anyway, so what the heck. Manny Mori says, Nissan Versa Cat's Clog. What should I do? I got 176,000 miles. That's typical on Nissan. They don't make very good cats. Those are cars that I see in catalytic converters in the United States more than anyone out there. They're making the cheap ones and they're sticking them in the Nissans. If you want to keep the vehicle, you didn't say what year it was, but I've had very good experience with the aftermarket Monroe catalytic converters. You can buy them online. You might buy one, put another one on. Now, if you live like in North Dakota or something where they don't do any kinds of inspections or anything, you could remove it. You would be breaking federal law doing it. But it would run better, there's no arguing that. If nobody's checking it, what would you care? A lot of times you can get the aftermarket ones and bolt them on or have them welded on for those. It's running hotter. Your temperature gauge is getting hotter. And you can't go faster. You're going to have to do something about it. But let's say you're getting that cold inefficient catalytic converter, but it still runs okay. I've had customers driving years that way. Nighthawk says, Scotty, what do you think of a Toyota Previa? They were very interesting vans. They were actually overbuilt. They had that four-cylinder engine kind of in the middle, and then they had a drive shaft in the back that drove the rear wheels, but they had another short drive shaft that went to the front, which ran the air conditioning and water pump and different things. It was kind of a crazy design. They could run forever, but the problem was they cost too much money to make. And since they cost too much money to make, stopped making them. They made the Siennas. The Siennas are excellent vans. They're probably the best vans out there. But the old Previas were even better built. I've seen some of those with 700,000 miles on them. But having the engine in the middle, they're harder to work on and stuff. But they really were well-made vans. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.